That's not bad, I said. Lovely people. But anyway, I was in this missionary home, and I looked at New York through different eyes suddenly, you know. I looked through the eyes of a tourist. I thought, well, we're going to be with God's people, but we're going to be, they said they're going to give us a little time in this missionary home. The whole family, for like 6 days, we were going to be, just to be able to meet Christians in New York and see New York. Now, I'm not a tourist, and some people are devastated by that. I'm so anti-tourism. You can't believe it. Poor old Mr. Gothard's friend, Brother Otto Koenig. How many know him? Put your hands up. Oh my, I'm in trouble if I say the wrong thing here tonight. He took me under his wing, you know. Mr. Gothard said when I was with him preaching last year this time in their center in Chicago, just to get videos of messages from Mr. Gothard there. Well, Mr. Gothard said to Mr. Koenig, you take him around, show him Chicago, anything he wants, just a little space here and there. So Otto Koenig took me down to central Chicago, and he said, you see that building there? It was this big Sears building, you know, the tallest, now that the Twin Towers have come down, that's the tallest building in America, I believe. He said, do you want to go up there? There's a deck at the top for tourists to see. I said, no. He said, no. Where do you want to go? Oh, it's terrible not being a tourist type of a person, you know. But I want to go and see Moody's pulpit. Moody preached in Chicago. He said, Moody's pulpit? Well, let's go and see. That's the Moody Bible Institute. And then there's the Moody Memorial Church where this fellow, Erwin Litzer, is. So we go inside, and I said, he said he wants to see Moody's church and Moody's pulpit. So they said, oh, do you want to see Mr. Lutz? I said, no, I don't think he wants to see me. I just want to see Moody's pulpit. Is that where he preached? I said, no, this is all new. This is Mr. Lutz's pulpit. And she said, don't you want to tour around the church? I said, no, I don't want to tour around a church that wasn't Moody's. Even if it's more Moody Memorial Church, I want to see Moody's pulpit. And the old organ Sankey played on, you know. So she said, well, it's in the basement, she said. So we went down the basement, and we saw there was this plank, you know, with all marks, just a little plank. No wonder God used him, oh my. There was Sankey, the organ his pedal organ that he played moved the world to God. Oh, thank God for Moody and Sankey. And then I said after the little prayer, now let's go home. So I'm not a tourist, okay? But now my children and my wife was coming back to America. We were going to have 6 days in New York. And I thought to myself, well, I know David Wilkerson's church is in Broadway, in Central Manhattan. But I thought I was looking through different eyes now at New York, you know. Normally I was praying, and I don't wear glasses when I'm praying because I don't see much. And well, I don't want to see much, so I just don't wear my glasses. What's the point of seeing things, you know? I just want to pray. But now I put my glasses on, and I went through New York. Oh, that's the Statue of Liberty, you know. I'm going to bring my children to see. I got a bit excited when I thought of bringing them to New York. I mean, it's not sin. A lot of Vanity Fair, perhaps, but let's face it, it's not sin if you come from Africa to show your children the Statue of Liberty. And there's the Empire State Building. Well, now I know how to get to this, you know. And I did a lot of walking. And a lot of looking. I got quite excited. Then I went to what you call Times Square in Manhattan, here in Broadway, where all these theaters in the world, as you know, and it was in the dark night. New York never goes to sleep. There were thousands. There was, goodness me, I would say close to 50, maybe even up to 100,000. I don't know where they come from all over the world, but it was late when you and I should be in bed. Because they were all awake, I thought, well, I might as well stay awake. Then it's pretty safe, and I'll at least look, you know. So I look at Times Square, all the neon lights. It's like another planet, little on another country. Just Vanity Fair, but I know history. I know history like the back of my hand. I know most countries' history better than most people. You better not believe that, but I, from a child, just devoured history. I've always loved it. And I knew the significance of Times Square, the great events that happened politically in your history in Times Square. It wasn't the neon lights that attracted me, but I thought, well, there's two of the greatest squares in the world. It's Piccadilly Circus in London and Times Square in New York, of the two nations. That's the two greatest squares, the most famous, where more tourists go than anywhere in the whole world. Through the greatness, the significance historically about that, these great cities. Well, I was walking, and suddenly my heart sank, because I saw a building suddenly with neon lights that was so filthy, what was being advertised on those neon lights and the other things behind, the lights flared up. I could not believe my eyes that such filth and depravity was so publicly. My heart just sank. I said, no, God, no. And I began to cry, just at seeing it. If it was so filthy outside, can you imagine how defiled a human would be inside if you walked in? What would be going on inside? With the adverts, it was defiling. I turned around and looked around, and there was another building. It was worse, bigger, more light, worse filth. And I carried on looking around, and there was another one, 3 of them, in Times Square. And I watched men. Some men walked past there as if they were going to pass, you know. Suddenly they pulled their jackets over them, and they ran in, hiding their faces. They were ashamed. Someone could take a photograph or some evidence against them. They were scared people would recognize them. Others came past, and they were so brazen in their sin, laughing, they just laughed as they walked in, you know. I looked at them and I realized they have no self-respect. A man who can walk into such a place, no one in the world respects that man. That's why he can do it. There's no one left, not even his children, who would bat an eyelid at his stuff. So he can walk in laughing, no putting his head under the... I looked at them marching and they're laughing with no shame. You lose your honor, you've got nothing left in life, sir. Once you've lost that, you've got nothing. Well, I began to weep aloud, and I said, God, I can't bring my children to New York. I looked at all the children, most people in that Times Square, late hour of the night, it was terribly late, in their thousands and thousands, thronging. Most had children coming from all parts of the world. I suppose the last few minutes before they fly out of your country, they want to see the last things they can in this place of the world, this Times Square. And I watched the children looking, and their mothers and fathers trying to pull their eyes off, and they're looking, and I thought, no. You defile a child bringing your child to America. You defile your child bringing your child to New York, the greatest city in the world. How do you honestly believe the seeds the devil is going to sow within your heart? I said, God, I can't bring my children here. The devil will put things in their mind. There'll be no ending to the repercussions. And I began to weep, but I began to weep louder than I thought I was weeping. I wept so loud that I was standing there sobbing. I sobbed so loud. I was broken. I was so devastated at what America was doing. And I lifted my hands up, and I shouted. I didn't know I was shouting. I wasn't trying to be fanatical. I shouted. I cried so loud to God in my devastation, in my anger, that I couldn't bring my children to the city without defiling them. I cried out, God, oh God, do anything but close these buildings down, God. They're defiling the children, God. This is defiling. Close these buildings down, God. Close these buildings down, God. They're defiling. I cannot bring my family here, God. Close these buildings down, God. Do anything but close them down. In Jesus Christ's name I wept. And I suddenly wiped the tears from my eyes. A few hundred people were standing still. I would say a few hundred, could be 500, had stopped close to me, just all a deathly silence all around me. And brother, sister, I looked at their faces, most of them, tears were coming down their faces. They'd never in their life seen a man weep over defilement in this generation. They'd never ever seen a man hurting and broken and smashed and crushed to weep and cry to God in devastation as I was. And I looked at face upon face, tears. They couldn't move as they heard clearly what I was crying, and they knew what I was praying about. I put my head down and just pushed through. Somehow they let me through and I walked home. 3 months later, I flew back to New York, to JFK, to the airport. When I arrive in New York, if they aren't there to meet me because of an early flight arrival or getting through customs fast, they've given me a coffee shop, all your leaders that bring me here, these 4 or 5 leaders of the Conservative Church of America. They tell me there's a coffee shop there. You wait there and when we get the people will come to get you. So I saw I was through customs. I went and got a cup of coffee and a newspaper, the USA Today, and I sat down and I put it down and I started to cry again. Seconds. Within seconds, I began to start weeping again. Why? On the front page of the newspaper were these words: the day I came back. The mayor of New York says I will close these buildings down now. I started to cry. The day the man that wept on those streets for God to close them, 3 months later, that day was the day the news came out of that man, printed on your newspapers. That was God saying to this poor man, I don't turn my face away from anyone who weeps and grieves over the wickedness of this world and asks me to deal with it. I read on. This mayor of New York, he's an Italian. He's not saved. But oh, has he got things right that no other mayor's got right in any country in the world, let me tell you. He's the envy of the whole world. 12 million people are in New York. 3% are affected by crime annually. He has got such no tolerance, zero tolerance of crime. He's the envy of the whole world. The cities across the world with 1/10 of that population, they're scared to put their foot out of the door in the night without being mugged. He's got a city you can walk 2 o'clock in the morning and you don't get mugged, most of it. He's the envy of the world. He's got people been flying in brought in by governments. What did this man do right, this mayor of New York? We need to learn from him because no city on the earth is safe anymore the way things are going. What has he done? Teach us. Oh, he really is something, this man. And he's unsaved. He said these words: the law of freedom of speech in America gives you the right to do this. You're covered by the law. But I'm the mayor of this city. It's my city. I'm going to make another law to cancel out the law of America. I'm going to make a law that every block in New York City, Manhattan, every block that has a resident staying, anybody staying residential, a family, anybody like a residential, where homesteads are, in that block, none of these buildings are allowed to, no shop will be allowed. And he said, I'll put people in every single block, but I'll close you down. And he said, don't wait for me to don't force me to do that. He says, I'll tell you why. Those of you that don't close your doors now, right now, I'm going to march in there with my police. I'm going to go through your books. I'm going to find things that will crush you, and you know I will crush you. I will crush you. You close now, or I will destroy you. I commend you, sir, if you ever hear this tape. You're not saved, but I prayed so much for your soul. But I commend you. You are gallant. Well, I went and preached. I came ahead of my family by 2-3 weeks to preach around, and then landed up in this church. And my family joined me, and then we went to New York after the lovely fellowship they gave us and the way they honored us. And I took my children to Times Square. And I started weeping again. My children, my family don't ask me why I weep. I weep so much, you know. They kind of just get used to it. They just looked at me as I walked, holding their hands as I walked through Times Square. I suppose they wondered, why is he weeping now? But I was weeping a different weeping. There was no agony. There was no torment or indignation. It Satan what he's done. There was joy. There was gratitude. There was worship going on. As I said, thank you, God. As I looked at these buildings, they were like buildings that had been destitute. They ripped everything off the outside, every light, every neon light, every sign, and they were empty like ghost houses. Let me tell you something, Christians of America. There is nothing God will not do for you for this land to be healed. If you get right with God and you begin to pray on your knees, the only army that will ever save America from what the devil is trying to do to her is the army of God's people on their knees. That if you get right with God, if you begin to seek God, America's Christians, stop fighting my doctrine or my standards, sir. You won't have a land to be even liberal in your church later. You better get right with God and do what your heart tells you. Seek God for righteousness. Get back to this book. If my people who are called by my name in America, I believe you say it's out of its context. I'm big enough to say it's in its context. It's what God holds out to any land. This book was not history. It's God's word to today. Knowing its context to be safe, but be careful. Don't bury God's dealings or promises to any land, especially his people. We're the people. Let me tell you, there are enough Christians in America that if they got down as an army, there's no army that will outnumber them for force, for God. There's nothing the devil has done in this land that you will not undo in days, perhaps 3 weeks, I would say. I would say give yourself 3 months and you will not believe how this whole land is turning back to God through you. And all the things that are defiling and destroying, despairing you, don't wait for the politicians to become righteous. It's the church. I don't blame the politicians. I blame the church for what state your country's in. You should be on your knees and you should be in war. And you could undo anything the devil's done, but you're listening more to the television news than you are on your knees. You're sitting there watching in hopelessness and unbelief and criticizing the government, and it's our fault. It's my people God's waiting for. To get down before God, don't worry about the news anymore. Get down before God. You know enough to know you need to get down before God and get through in war. And by the by, these Muslim people of the world, Islam, suddenly the world's trembling and America's trembling. We're all trembling because there's no rational reasoning with these people that we can think, a decent human being could think. They're thinking it. I want to tell you something. I'm not against your politicians. I'm not political in what's going on to try and stop those elements that are all... I'll tell you this, though. You want to stop what they're going to do to the world, Christians of America and Christians of the world. It won't stop. We're just tasting what's coming. But they will stop when you get down on your knees and start praying for Islam to be saved. To turn to Christ. Do you honestly believe that every born-again Christian in America who's truly born again got right with God, which is so easy, the blood is there if you really want it and really mean business, and started praying earnestly, every born-again believer on their knees like an army against the devil who's brought such darkness to these people? If you do honestly believe, is there one of you sitting here that doesn't honestly believe that within 3 months, millions of Muslims would turn to Christ? If we were all crying for God to do it. Do you honestly believe God would turn his face and say no? I'll tell you something. Wait for politicians to deal with the problem, and you won't have a country left. And further field, you won't have a world left just now, Christians. You better get to war with the weapons God's given you. While you have a moment left to do it, you'd better do it, and God will honor you. There's only one problem. There's only one fear in my heart. Only one. That Christians are too proud to admit They need to seek God first and confess their sins, their compromises, and their liberalness, and their worldliness, and their methods. They'll be too proud to say we need to get down in desperation and get right first, and confess our sins and turn from our wicked ways, so that God can forgive us first and then heal the land through us on our knees in prayer for the land. That's the only fear I have for America. That's the only danger America is in, is if the church is too proud to get down before God in desperation to get right with God. Your history is in your hands, Christians. And this Bible tells me that. God is waiting. God is seeking. God is longing. It's not God's fault.